Hello! Welcome to a brand new day of free-to-play here on Magic the Gathering Arena. Get the dish on the latest with me, Lord Rumfish. We're talking about the Deckbuilding Toolbox series. This is Multicolor. Wilds of Eldraine Multicolor. So, as always, we will start with the commons and uncommons. The basic premise is to fill your collection with cards that can go into a wide variety of different decks and roles. And some of these cards might be more narrow, and they might have the kernel of a deck idea kind of seeded in. Generally, though, I like to highlight cards that are widely applicable. So, the reason I left Multicolor for last is these have the most stringent requirements as far as deck building. Right? Colorless and lands have the least stringent. So we make our way from like colorless to where it can go into any deck, finally to multicolor, where it has the tightest requirements. Alright, let's get started here. Callusel Sword. So the adventure on this is interesting. It's kind of like a fling. So, burn together, sorcery, 1 red. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to any other target. Then sacrifice it. So this is a 1 red mana spell that could take, Yargle and Multani or whatever, and deal 18 damage to the opponent with it. You sacrifice it afterwards. Then the Callusel Sword. It's a 2/2 for 2 human soldier, which is not an irrelevant couple of creature types. It enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each creature that died under your control this turn. So if you cast the Burn Together, at least one creature has died. And that would make this a 3/3 for 2. And that's a good, solid rate. That's a playable card. So, you need to build around this a little bit. But I think this could be a great card in some kind of combo deck or aristocrats deck. It's not impossible it could go into a humans or soldiers deck. Like maybe Mardu colors for that. I don't know, all the way around, I feel like this card could do work. Obira, Dreaming Duelist. So we have a legendary fairy warrior, 2/2 for 2, flash and flying. Right there, all of that makes this pretty playable. It'd be better if it wasn't legendary, but still. And then whenever another fairy enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life. So you get this little drain tacked on that starts adding up quickly. And if you're able to flash in a lot of your flyers, then the opponent has a harder time, calculating how much damage they're going to take on the crackback. It's a good tempo card for a tempo-oriented fairies deck. Does not go into a wide variety of decks. I mean, a 2/2 flash flyer's fine. It's not bad at all, but pretty much this is just for the fairies deck, but I think it's good enough to make the cut there. Ruby, Daring Tracker. So Ruby is a mana creature, right? Taps for red or green, and she has haste. So she can make the mana right away. And that's neat. That's kind of like getting a mana rock, like Iron Crag, that comes in untapped so you can use it right away. Ruby's the same way. And whenever she attacks while you control a creature with power 4 or greater, she gets +2/+2. So she attacks as a 3/4 if you have a 4 power or greater creature. All the way around, Ruby seems like she's probably got some decks that might want her. seems powerful enough to me to be seeing play. So decide for yourself. And again, these are the commons and uncommons. I don't think there's a whole lot of commons to speak of here, but still, these are just uncommon wild cards we're talking about. Ash, Party Crasher. Good solid 2-drop, 2/2 with haste. For 2, that's playable. And Celebration, whenever she attacks, if 2 or more non-land permanents enter the battlefield under your control this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Ash. So she can grow over time if you can trigger the Celebration. And it takes a playable card and turns it up a notch into a, must deal with game-ending threat, to where the game ends before it's even started. Trigger this even once, and she's grown out of range of a cut down. Do it again, and she's grown out of range of a lot of red removal. So, the thing that's hard to parse here is, is there a red-white deck? And can you trigger the Celebration, and is that even necessary? Ash is a pretty good attacker even without the Celebration. I'm not sure, but I think Ash could be good enough if you can get it to work. Woodland Acolyte. Usually I like adventures that stand up on their own on adventure creatures, but in this case, the creature is the part that you might want to be running. It's just a 2/2 for 3. When it ETBs, you draw a card. That's not bad. That's not bad at all. And then you've also got Mend the Wild. It's instant, 1 green. You can put a permanent card from your graveyard on top of your library. Now, on top of your library is not anywhere near as good as into your hand. In fact, you need to be careful to make sure that you're not setting yourself back when you're using this ability. But as long as you're pretty sure you've got something you'd be happy to draw, then, reasonable adventure. Nice that you can hold it open at instant speed. And you get this 2/2 body that can draw you a card. It's not super exciting, but then again, it seems like it's something that's imminently playable. It has the human creature type that could be relevant. Decide for yourself. There are other cards in white that come down for 2 or 3 and draw you a card and they see play. At least some. So, maybe. Alright, Frolicking Familiar. I like the adventure on this card. Blow off steam, 1 red, instant. 1 damage to any target. This is the kind of thing you want to sneak into your deck to kill Thalia. This right here. Now, we might be able to find some other targets like Skrelv and some other annoying things that hang around at, the 1 toughness. And if that just completely fails, maybe you can pick off a Wandering Emperor that's, done the -2 exile. Or you can just go to the opponent's face. That's not super exciting for 1 mana, but you could be triggering Prowess, or things like Prowess, like the ability the Frolicking Familiar has. Or Thermo Alchemists, or stuff like that. I don't know if this card is good enough to see play, but the adventure seems alright. It's small, but useful. It's still tacked onto this body later in the game. 2/2 flyers, not the worst. If you manage to get value out of the 1 damage, then, getting the Frolicking Familiar later, that's just upside. Imidane's Recruiter. We've got a Human Knight. It's a 2/2 for 3, but when it ETBs, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain haste. including itself. So a 3/2 haster for 3 is already kind of borderline playable. It gives a pump to your whole team when it hits the battlefield, and that could be a completely game-ending threat. And if you get to 5 mana, you can make a pair of 2/2 Knights of Vigilance. So you could end the game, almost immediately with a super aggressive start and drop down the Recruiter, just, as itself. If the game goes long, then you've got this source of additional bodies. And if the game went really long, then for 8 mana, you could get 3 3/2s all attacking with haste. Right? You play the trained troops, then you play the Recruiter. I'm not saying that's likely to happen in an aggressive deck, but, stranger things. Maybe one game out of 50. Yeah, this card seems alright to me. I have not really seen people experimenting with it, but the explosive amount of damage that this could cause with a wide board, I don't see why you wouldn't be experimenting with it. Totentanz, Swarm Piper. So whenever this or another non-token creature you control dies, you get a rat that can't block. So it's nice that it replaces itself with a rat, as well as your other creatures. And you can also pay black and 1, target attacking rat you control gains Death Touch. So you can't make your blocking rats gain Death Touch, but it makes them very aggressive. And this card, it's kind of like an engine, right? In an Aristocrats-style deck. As long as you have non-token creatures to die, or sacrifice, or what have you, then it's going to put out bodies onto the field. It's going to make rats. And there's no limit on the number of times per turn you can do that. A little trick that I noticed with this card, since it triggers from itself dying, is you can legend roll it. You can play a second copy, let the second copy die, and it makes a rat. Actually, would that make 2 rats? Because for just a moment you would have 2 Totentanz, right? The one you keep in play would see that creature die, and it would trigger for itself dying. I think it would make 2 rats. That's kinda neat. Yeah, it's better than I was thinking. So yeah, this card interests me for not just rat decks. It interests me for, sacrifice decks, aristocrats kind of decks. If you, happen to get a rat synergy going, then that's cool, but I think it could have other applications too. Greta, Sweet Tooth Scourge. It's a ridiculous piece of art. Love all the color in it. She is a 3/3 legendary human warrior for 3. When she ETBs, you create a food. Then you can pay a green, sacrifice a food, put a counter on target creature, +1/+1. That one only happens as a sorcery. So you can't change combat math on the fly. But at instant speed, this is always confusing to me when a card has like a sorcery speed activation and a non-sorcery speed activation. I don't exactly care for it, but at instant speed, you can pay a black and 1, sacrifice food, draw a card, and lose 1 life. So Greta is not the worst body. She's a 3/3 for 3, makes a food. And then she's got these sacrifice outlets for food. At the very least, she could, you know, gain you 3 life or draw you a card. She could turn herself into a 4/4. Just Greta by herself, without any other food synergies, already is not a bad card. It's not at all difficult to imagine that with a lot more food lying around, some pretty silly stuff could start happening. You know, you could put out a lot of +1 counters if that's what you were if that's what you were after. Drawing cards is obviously powerful, so yeah. Greta could have work to do. Troian, Gutsy Explorer. So we've got a 1/3 Vidalcan Scout for 3. Tap to add a green and a blue. Spend this mana only to cast spells with mana value 5 or greater, or spells with X in their mana costs. Tapping to make 2 mana is a pretty big bump. That's a pretty big ramp. Now, Troian, you know, does die to a cut down or a lightning strike, or quite a few removal spells. Is a little bit fragile, but 3 toughness is not extremely fragile. If it survives, then Troian is going to ramp you straight on into 5 or 6 drops. If you get your, 4th land. And the option to work with X spells is also interesting for deck building considerations. You got the Goose Mother, Hydra Goose. And this card can also, loot for you. It can pay a blue and tap, draw a card, discard a card. I'm not sure if this card is good enough if it sticks on the battlefield. I feel like the amount of mana ramp is a big deal. At that point, it's good enough. If it doesn't stick around on the battlefield and you're just down a card, that's when it's not as good. So we have a pretty removal-heavy standard at the moment. I'm not sure if a card like this is going to make it, but if it hit the battlefield and it got back to your turn, this would be a pretty stellar card. Threadbind Click. So the adventure on this one is the big deal. It's a white and 2 colorless instant. Destroy target tapped creature. So, kind of like the Wandering Emperor, someone comes in and attacks you, destroy it. And then you still have Phantom Monster, a 3/3 flyer for 4. And it can work with your fairy synergies if you can fit white into your fairy deck. I think this card's actually pretty good. I think the adventure is playable, and so getting a 3/3 flyer for 4 is a pretty good proposition after using your removal spell. So I like it. Spellscorn Ven. Again, the adventure on this card is kind of like Divide by Zero. You return a spell to its owner's hand, you don't even counter it. You can counter an uncounterable spell because you just return it back to its owner's hand. And then, instead of, going and getting a lesson, like Divide by Zero, you get Spellscorn Ven. It's a 2/3 flyer for 4. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card. So, you started out with this tempo play counterspell. Then you get down this body that actually, puts you up a card by making the opponent discard. I think this card is much, much better than it looks, and should probably be seeing main deck play in Fairies decks, because the counterspell on it is kind of amazing, and so being able to get the fairy attached to it makes it good enough. Tempest Heart. So I like the adventure here. Scan the clouds. It's a blue and 1 instant. Draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards. It's just a good, solid, looting effect. Normally you don't want to be down a card for doing that, but you're not. You're not down a card because you still have access to the Tempest Heart afterwards. It's a 3/4 trampler for 4. Nothing exciting, but whenever you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, it gets a +1 counter. And I don't think you have to build for that synergy, but it will look much better in your deck if the synergy, can trigger off. So is this card worth it? I guess it depends on if you want to be filling up your graveyard, right, with the draws and discards, or if you have things that are triggering off of the draws, like, there are spells that care about drawing your second card each turn, that kind of thing. Yeah, the adventure on this is pretty solid, and so the creature doesn't look too bad if you want the adventure. Gingerbread Hunter, this one, I think, is one of the weaker ones of the uncommon list here. So, you get Puny Snack, an instant, black and 2 colorless. Target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. That's not a very exciting removal spell. But if you're looking for value and you're on a budget, then you can pick off something early of the opponents. You can mess with combat math, right? At instant speed, just debuff something after it's been blocked. And the Gingerbread Hunter is also a 5/5 that makes a food token when it comes out. I think this is kind of like scraping towards the bottom of the barrel in terms of having enough value to think about seeing play. It's pretty weak, but just when you put the two things together, it's like it's not great, but it might be alright. If you have a well-filled out collection, you probably don't need this card. If you're in the early days of your account and you want to build a green-black deck, you could do worse. This is probably okay for a budget deck. Alright, time to do some crafting. Put my money where my mouth is here. There's some fun new cards. Alright, on to the rares and mythics. Heartflame Duelist. This is a good spell. So you can deal 3 damage at instant speed for 3. It's a good, solid removal spell. It can go to a planeswalker, can go to the opponent's face to finish them off. And the creature is fine. You get a 3/1 for 2. Instant and sorcery spells you control have lifelink. So you get to gain some extra life as you're, blazing through your deck and burning the opponent's face. Helps you win a damage race. I like it. Just seems like it's a good, solid rate. Prices you're willing to pay. Pollen Shield here, this one is a little bit more narrow. So you get a 2/2 rabbit that gives creature tokens you control +1/+1. Obviously, you want this in a token deck. You want to have some ability to make token creatures if you want to run the Pollen Shield here. The adventure can give a pretty big boost, though. Target creature you control gains vigilance and gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. That would almost make it worth it in a non-token deck. Just if you go wide with a bunch of creatures, give something a giant boost in vigilance. Being at sorcery speed means the opponent sees it coming, but you still might be able to catch them where they weren't expecting that much damage to come across. I think this card is alright, but it doesn't have as wide of applicability. Cruel Somnophage. I'm a big fan of this card. Its power and toughness are each equal to the number of creature cards in all graveyards. Not just yours, counts the opponent's as well. It becomes enormous. And the sorcery is fun too. Target player mills 4 cards. Usually that'll be yourself when you're doing this strategy. You'll want to bin a bunch of your own creatures into the graveyard. But if the opponent's got a bunch of creatures in their deck, you could hit them with this too. Or, you know, if you think you might get a mill win, you could use it in that way. So, it's alright. Obviously great in the self-mill graveyard deck. Outside possibility that it could see some play in a mill deck. Scalding Viper. The adventure's alright on this. Blue and 1, sorcery. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. That's fine, it's like a fair rate. And the Viper itself is a 2/1 for 2 that whenever the opponent casts a spell with mana value 3 or less, Scalding Viper deals 1 damage to that player. Probably most of the spells in your opponent's deck cost 3 or less. So I could see a scenario where a lot of damage stacks up from this card if the opponent doesn't immediately kill it. And they might take 1 damage in the process of killing it. So it's interesting. I think there could be a deck here. Mosswood Dreadnite. So far the consensus seems to be this card is just excellent. It looks excellent. So far in play it has been pretty excellent. Who doesn't like, you know, small efficient creatures that draw cards and can maybe keep coming back over and over again? This card by itself could be doing a lot of work to resurrect, you know, green-black as an archetype. Questing Druid. I've seen some decks trying to use this card. So this is a Quirion Dryad, right? 1/1 for 2 whenever you cast a spell that's white, blue, black, or red, anything other than green. Well, it doesn't have to be non-green, it just has to be one of those colors. You put a +1/+1 counter on the Questing Druid, and the adventure on it is not bad. Red and 1, it's an instant. The instant part's important. Exile the top 2 cards of your library until your next end step. You may play those cards. So you can play that at the end of the opponent's turn and then have your mana untapped. And you're ready to try to use those cards on your next turn. Overall, you know, people seem to like it, seem to be getting some use out of it. So, yeah, if you want to build those kind of decks, it seems to be plenty playable. Likeness Looter. This is a fairy. Can also turn into copies of things from the graveyard. So it's a 1/1 flyer. It can loot, right? It can draw and discard. And then you can pay X at sorcery speed, and it becomes a copy of a creature card in your graveyard with mana value X, except it has flying and it keeps the ability to keep turning into other things. So I had some pretty good luck using Likeness Looter in a graveyard deck, right, along with Cruel Somnophage when I was doing the early access event. And Cruel Somnophage was a great target for this to copy. It turns into a flying Cruel Somnophage. I think this card is actually really, really good. There are a lot of potent things for it to turn into. The Goose Mother. Green, blue, and X. Legendary creature Bird Hydra. It's a 2/2 flyer. Enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. So however much mana you put into this, it's always going to be that big. Because it's a 2/2 for 2 if you don't pay anything into X. Which is a reasonable body. That's not exciting, but it's a reasonable flyer. When it enters the battlefield, you create half X food tokens rounded up. So as long as X is at least 1, you'll get at least 1 food. And whenever this attacks, you can sacrifice a food if you do draw a card. This card, I think, is not bad. Not bad at all. Probably we will continue to see plenty of the Goose Mother during its time in Standard. It doesn't just have to be in a food deck. It goes fine into a big ramp deck. Could have some play into an artifact synergy deck. Yeah, I think the Goose Mother all the way around is a pretty reasonable proposition. You get a giant flyer, pile of artifacts, can gain life, can draw cards. It's good. Kellen the Fable. So this is an odd one. A 2/2 double striker for 3 is... eh. You know, it's okay. It doesn't do anything special like have haste or draw you a card. You know, it does have the ability other creatures you control get +1/+0 for each aura and equipment attached to Kellen. And there are some easy ways to do that, the roll tokens and such. It's not hard to get an aura on them. There are some sneaky equipments you could try to use that flash in and equip at instant speed. So I could see a bit of a deck there. There's also an adventure, Birthright Boon, 1 and a white, sorcery. Search your library for an aura or equipment card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. This part of the card is more interesting to me. You get to tutor for an aura or equipment, and there's some pretty good auras. Right? Ossification is an aura. There are a number of other removal auras you could also pull up out of your deck, but Ossification just by itself would be a pretty reasonable one. Kellen, because he can fetch up a piece of removal like that, Kellen might go into some kind of a mid-rangey kind of pile. That's like getting value off of the adventure. He plays him out later, and, you know, maybe you use his abilities and such. Maybe you are just happy to get an extra card attached to your tutor for a piece of removal. I think he's alright. I'm not real excited about him, but I think he's alright. Baluna Grand Squall. So she seems fun. You can get a 4/4 Trampler for 3 that has a mana cost reducing effect. Permanent spells you cast that have an adventure cost 1 less. So, you know, a 4/4 Trampler for 3 is kind of like on rate for Standard. It's about what you expect if you want like a hit of a beatdown creature at 3. The 3 colors are a little bit hard to hit, but you can do it. The cost reducing is really nice. And then the adventure that comes along with it, it's an instant, it's 5 mana. You mill 7 cards, then put all cards that have an adventure from among the milled cards into your hand. So Baluna really wants to go in an adventure deck. Right? A green, blue, red adventure deck. Value proposition on this card, she's got a good-sized body. She has a good effect that makes your spells cheaper. She has a good adventure that can draw you a ton of cards. The only question is just whether this color combination, this deck, can exist. But this card seems like it's got all the power necessary to function. So it's just, what are the other things you surround it with? Can the deck survive? I'm a little curious. Right, Twining Twins. So you get a Swift Spiral. It's a white and 1 instant. It's a flicker effect. You exile target non-token creature, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So this lets you flicker something. It also lets you save it from a board wipe. Coming back at the end step is interesting. It's interesting. You can play with the delay. And as far as the creature, 4/4 Flying Vigilance Ward 1 for 4. It's a very solid chunk of body. You probably wouldn't play it in standard if that's all it did, but if you can use the Swift Spiral profitably, then yeah, you're happy to get this body onto the field. Seems like this could be really good. You just need to figure out what creatures you're flickering. Can do it to the opponent's things as well. Devouring Sugar Maw. So, the adventure is the real treat here. Have for dinner. White and 1, it's an instant. You create a 1/1 white human creature token and a food token. So that is pretty great for a bargain deck. It's also it's not bad in general. It's a pretty good amount of stuff to get for 2 mana at instant speed. Flash Blocker. Yeah, I like the adventure very much. The Devouring Sugar Maw can end the game if you can keep feeding it. Right, 6/6 Menace and Trample for 4. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may sacrifice an artifact, enchantment, or token if you don't tap this. So you either need to keep finding food for this, same conditions as bargain, artifact, enchantment, or token, or you need to find a way to untap it. It definitely plays well with its adventure, but could be pretty good in some kind of aristocrats pile. The adventure is tempting enough here that I would almost try to shoehorn this into decks where maybe it didn't quite fit, but don't do that. Make sure that you can use both parts of the card. Decadent Dragon, this seems very good. So Expensive Taste as an instant, a black and 2 colorless. Exile the top 2 cards of target opponent's library face down. You may look at and play those cards as long as they remain exiled. Now what this does not do is let you spend mana as though it were mana of any color. We may have gotten used to that templating on cards. They have not included it for a couple of cards in this set. So it might be good to have the ability to generate treasure, to have a little bit of mana filtering in your deck. If you want to steal cards from the opponent this way, you might want to have a little bit of deck building consideration about being able to cast those spells. As long as you can do that, then this is pretty amazing. You get a draw 2 at instant speed for 3, and then you get this big 4/4 Flying Trampler. If you ever get to attack with it, it makes treasure. that is a heck of a 1-2 punch, value proposition there. I really like that play pattern on this card. I just, before you consider it a slam dunk, just be aware it doesn't fix your mana for you to play their spells. So you have to figure that part out yourself. But as long as you do, I think this card is pretty great. The Apprentice's Folly. This is a really interesting spell. So you can choose a non-token creature that doesn't have the same name as a token you control. You create a token that's a copy of it. Except it's not legendary. It's a reflection, in addition to its other types, and it has haste. You do this twice. You do this on chapters 1 and 2. On chapter 3, you sacrifice all reflections you control, so before you ever get to chapter 3, right before that trigger ever hits the stack, you flicker, bounce, or sacrifice the Apprentice's Folly. You reset it. And then you keep those extra token copies forever. Then you can keep doing this. Now, you do have to keep finding new targets that don't have the same name as a token you control. So, figuring that part out is up to you. But yeah, even just being able to do this twice and sacrificing the Apprentice's Folly, that alone puts out a ton of crazy value for you, because you can be copying things like, Sheoldred and Toxrill and just outrageous stuff. Itali. If you get to keep those tokens, that's absurd. This card has the potential to be truly absurd. So if you like a real puzzle when you're deck building, and you want to find a card to break when you're trying to build a deck, this would be an interesting card to try to break. Faunsbane Troll. This is just a fair magic card. 4 mana for a 4/4 troll. When it ETBs, you get a monster roll token attached to it, so it's got 2 permanents. It's a 5/5 trampler because of the monster roll. If you have an extra 1 mana available, you can sacrifice an aura attached to the troll, like the one it came in with, and it fights target creature you don't control. Then if that creature would die this turn, you exile it. That ability is only at sorcery speed. This is a good card. It's a good spell. It's a removal spell and a body. And I think this is the one that you'd probably rather be playing than the green uncommon that costs 5. Right? It's a 4/4, and if you bargain it, it can fight something. This one is 4 mana, can be a 5/5 trampler, and has the extra option to sacrifice the added material it came in with. So it's just subtly better in a couple of important ways than the green uncommon. It's worth noting that if you sacrifice the roll token, it won't have trample anymore. But yeah, this is just a good, solid, fair magic card. I don't know if it's exciting enough to be seeing play in Standard, but it seems like it should be really close. Alright. It's time to craft a couple of cards here. So I know this is my 4th copy of Decadent Dragon, but I feel really strongly about this card. There's a deck that I want to build soon using this card. I think it's going to be fantastic. And I have no regrets about crafting. Mosswood Dreadnite just seems like such an amazing card. It's in two of my favorite colors. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and craft one here. Cruel Somnophage plays around in a space that I like. I think this card is kind of ridiculously powerful, and I would love to see this, kind of Sultai graveyard deck finally come to fruition. So I'm going to go ahead and craft a copy here. I think at least 2 copies of the Goose Mother seems like something I would like to try to build around for decks I might construct. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and go for the second copy of the Goose Mother here. I really don't know if Baluna Grand Squall is going to be a thing or not. But, I'm curious. It seems like the power's there, so I'm going to go ahead and craft a copy. Alright, I'm going to hold there for now. I'll continue to burn wild cards as I create new decks, create new content on this channel. But for now, that brings me to the end of the update to the Deckbuilding Toolbox series for Wilds of Eldraine. I'll be updating this again as soon as the next big set releases. That'll be Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Be interesting to see what they do with the underground there. Back to the land of dinosaurs. And until then, please like and subscribe and check out my other videos. Checking out the other videos is even more of a big deal than liking the videos. And never stop honing your critical thinking and empathy.